Ladies and gentlemen, I want to speak to your soul today, not just your mind, because there's something happening behind the scenes of your life that you can't see with your natural eyes. You may be in a season that feels like silence, like stagnation, like waiting. But I came to tell you God is rewriting your story while you wait. When it feels like nothing is happening in your life, when the prayers seem unanswered and the progress appears stalled, it's easy to assume that God is absent. But silence is not the same as absence. Just because you can't hear him doesn't mean he's not speaking. Just because you can't see his hand doesn't mean he's not moving. God works in silence, not absence. Think about a seed. Once it's planted in the ground, there's no immediate evidence that anything is happening. It looks like it's just sitting there, buried in the soil. No sound, no movement, no light. But under the surface, something powerful is taking place. The seed is breaking open, roots are forming, and life is beginning to steer. This is how God works in our lives. He does his deepest work in the places we can't see, and oftentimes we don't understand. In the silence, God is setting things in motion. In the silence, he's aligning opportunities, maturing your character, removing obstacles, and preparing what's next. Silence is God's incubator for destiny. We often equate noise and activity with progress, but the kingdom of God doesn't operate on human timelines or worldly signs. God is not in a hurry and he's never late. What looks like silence to you is often divine strategy from him. There are stories in the Bible where God's silence was not a sign of disinterest, but a setup for something miraculous. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. For years, it looked like God was silent. There were no divine announcements, no thunder from heaven, no angelic visitations. But behind the scenes, God was orchestrating a plan that would save nations. What felt like divine silence was divine choreography. Joseph's story proves that silence doesn't mean inactivity. It means God is writing a story complex and too powerful to be rushed. Look at the life of Jesus. After his birth, there's a period about 30 years where we hear very little. That's 3 decades of quiet. No miracles, no sermons, no signs, just silence. But during that time, Jesus was growing in wisdom, in stature, and in favor with God and man. God was preparing him in private for a public purpose. Those silent years weren't wasted. They were foundational. They were the framework for what was coming next. If silence was necessary for the Son of God, why do we fear it in our own lives? The problem is we live in a noisy world that teaches us to equate stillness with stagnation. But God doesn't need a microphone to move. He doesn't shout over the noise. He often whispers in the quiet. And if we're not careful, we'll mistake God's silence for his absence and miss the work he's doing in the background. Sometimes God goes silent because he wants to see if you trust his heart when you can't hear his voice. It's in the silence that faith is refined. Can you walk by faith and not by sight when all the evidence says nothing's changing? Can you keep obeying when there's no confirmation? Can you trust that God is still writing when it feels like your story is stuck? In silence, God tests your motives. Are you following him for the blessings or for who he is? Are you only obedient when you feel goosebumps and hear confirmations? Or can you walk faithfully in the dark? The silent seasons are often the most spiritual because they reveal what you really believe. Silence is not the enemy, it's the classroom. It's where patience is produced. It's where dependence is developed. It's where idols are exposed and intimacy is built. Some of the greatest revelations in your life will come not when God is shouting, but when he's whispering through the stillness. When God is silent, he's building your story with intentionality. He's removing what doesn't belong, strengthening what does, and preparing you to carry what you asked him for. We think we're waiting on God, but often he's waiting on us to grow into the person who can handle the next level. Silence is not passive, it's active. It's sacred ground where transformation begins. God's silence is never empty. It's full of purpose. It's filled with strategy, with timing, with wisdom beyond our understanding. Just because you don't see it happening doesn't mean it's not being done. God does some of his greatest work in the quiet moments when you think nothing is moving. Don't confuse the lack of noise with the lack of activity. God is working, not wasting. When you find yourself in a season of waiting, it's easy to believe that you've been forgotten. Our culture doesn't teach us how to wait. It teaches us how to hustle, how to grind, how to push. But the kingdom of God operates differently. In God's system, waiting is not wasted time. It's preparation. What feels like a delay is actually development. God uses waiting seasons to prepare you for the weight of what you're asking him to deliver. You don't put a fragile structure under a heavy load. The foundation has to be solid before the building can rise. That's why God won't promote you until you're prepared. He won't release the blessing until your character can carry it. So while you're waiting, you're not being punished. You're being prepared. Preparation doesn't feel glamorous. It's not flashy. It's not loud. And it doesn't usually get applause. It's the behind-the-scenes work, the private disciplines, the internal transformation. It's God working on your integrity, stretching your patience, deepening your faith, sharpening your discernment. And sometimes that preparation means removing people from your life, closing doors you wanted open, or withholding what you thought you were ready for. Waiting exposes what's really in your heart. It reveals your trust level. Are you in this because you want God's hand or because you trust his heart? Will you still follow him when it looks like nothing is happening? Will you keep showing up, keep obeying, keep sowing even when there's no harvest in sight? The waiting room is where spiritual maturity is formed. It's where you learn to worship without answers, to pray without results, to praise without proof. That's where power is birthed. God isn't just interested in taking you somewhere. He's interested in who you become on the way. He's not looking to make you comfortable. He's looking to make you capable. Think of David. He was anointed king as a teenager, but he didn't sit on the throne the next day. There were years of waiting, years of running from Saul, years of hiding in caves. It wasn't punishment. It was preparation. God was shaping David into the kind of leader who wouldn't fall under pressure, who wouldn't use power to oppress, who knew how to depend on God before depending on position. The delay was part of the design. We often want the promise without the process. We want elevation without endurance. But what God has for you is too important to hand over prematurely, so he lets you wait. Not to punish you, but to fortify you. Not to make you question him, but to teach you to trust him on a deeper level. When you're in the middle of the wait, it's tempting to take matters into your own hands, to create shortcuts, to force outcomes, to open doors God hasn't unlocked. But every shortcut in Scripture comes with consequences. Abraham tried to shortcut God's promise and birth Ishmael. Moses tried to deliver Israel his own way and ended up in the wilderness. The blessing of the Lord makes rich and adds no sorrow. But the blessing we force with our own hands often comes with burdens we're not built to bear. That's why waiting is actually mercy. It protects you from moving into something prematurely. It shields you from destroying with haste what was meant to be built through patience. God's timing is always precise. He's never early, never late. And what he's building in you during the wait is just as important as what you're waiting for. Waiting teaches you how to listen. It fine-tunes your sensitivity to God's voice. It clears out distractions, breaks down ego, and brings your focus back to him. The longer you wait, the more your prayers shift from God, give it to me now, to God, make me ready for what you want to give. That shift is maturity. That shift is alignment. So while it may feel like you're on hold, remember you're in training. God is not inactive. He's intentional. He's strengthening you for what's ahead. He's conditioning your spirit, anchoring your faith, and getting you ready to step into a promise that won't crush you when it comes. You're not being punished in the wait. You're being prepared for the wait. Sometimes when things don't happen on our timeline, we start to question if they're going to happen at all. The longer we wait, the more we wonder if maybe the door has closed, if the opportunity has passed, if the promise was just an illusion. But what we often call a delay, God calls a divine detour. And what feels like a no might just be a not yet. Your delay is not your denial. God is a God of timing. He moves with purpose, not panic. He's not rushing to meet a deadline you created. He's orchestrating your steps with precision, aligning people, places, and circumstances to bring about something far greater than you imagined. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. It just means God is still working out the parts you can't see. Delay is a test. It's a refining process. It asks the question, will you still believe when the door doesn't open right away? Will you trust God's character when his calendar doesn't match yours? Will you keep walking even when the path isn't clear? Real faith doesn't just praise God for open doors. It trusts him when the door stays shut. When God delays something, he's not withholding good from you. He's protecting the fullness of his plan. He's not trying to frustrate you. He's trying to form you. There's a big difference between waiting because you're forgotten and waiting because the promise is still being forged. God sees what you cannot see. He knows the connections that aren't ready yet, the environments that need to change, and the maturity you still need to develop before stepping into the next season. Look at the story of Lazarus. When Jesus heard Lazarus was sick, he didn't rush to heal him. In fact, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. From the outside, it looked like delay. It looked like Jesus was too late, but he wasn't delayed. He was right on time for a resurrection. What others thought was death, Jesus called an opportunity for God's glory to be revealed. The delay wasn't a denial. It was a setup for something greater than anyone expected. The enemy wants you to equate delay with defeat. He whispers that if it hasn't happened yet, it's never going to happen. That if the door didn't open, it must mean it's locked forever. But God's promises don't expire. He's not bound by time. What he said he will do. The challenge is not whether God will fulfill his word. The challenge is whether you'll remain faithful while he prepares the way. There are some doors that look closed now, but they're not locked. They're just on a schedule. There are some dreams that seem out of reach, but they're not dead. They're in development. Delay sharpens your faith. It detaches you from outcomes and attaches you to the one who controls the outcome. It's easy to trust when everything is happening fast, when the answers are immediate, when the path is clear. But deep trust is forged in the delay. Delay is also where you're stripped of your need to control. It's where you learn to surrender. It's where you realize that you're not the author of your story. God is. And he's not just trying to give you something quickly. He's trying to give you something sustainably. A quick breakthrough without character to sustain it becomes a burden, not a blessing. So if you're in a season where it feels like everything is moving slowly or not at all, don't panic. Don't let doubt convince you that God has changed his mind. Don't assume that silence equals a canceled assignment. Sometimes God delays to show you what he can do without your help. Sometimes he waits until the last moment so that when it happens, you'll know it wasn't your strength, your strategy, or your skill. It was his hand. Your delay is not a denial. It's preparation for fulfillment. It's a refining of your motives, a training ground for your spirit, a detox from your dependency on instant gratification. Don't rush what God is building. Don't abandon the process because it feels slow. His timing is not just better, it's perfect. And when the time is right, what felt like delay will suddenly look like destiny. When God rewrites your story, he doesn't simply adjust the surface. He goes deep into your identity, your patterns, your beliefs, and your purpose. He's not interested in cosmetic changes or temporary fixes. He wants transformation, not just transition. That's why when God edits your story, he does it to elevate your purpose. Many people are trying to write their own version of life, crafting plans based on what they think they want or what the world tells them is success. But when God steps in as the author, he brings divine clarity and realignment. What seemed important before begins to fade, and what really matters comes into focus. Your life isn't just about what you can accumulate, achieve, or experience. It's about the purpose you were created for. And only God knows the fullness of that purpose. So when he begins editing, it can feel disruptive. It might look like closed doors, ended relationships, unexpected detours, or even seasons of loss. But every edit God makes is intentional. Every adjustment is designed to bring you into greater alignment with your calling. What you thought was a setback is often a strategic shift. What felt like rejection is actually redirection. He's not reducing your life. He's refining it. Sometimes God removes people not because they were evil, but because they were part of an old chapter. You've outgrown their influence. They were attached to a version of you that no longer exists. And in order to elevate your purpose, God has to disconnect you from environments and relationships that would keep you grounded in mediocrity. Growth always requires separation. God's edits also reach into your thought life. He begins rewriting the narratives you've believed about yourself, about him, and about your worth. Where you saw failure, he speaks favor. Where you saw shame, he speaks restoration. Where you saw limits, he speaks possibility. His edits erase lies and insert truth. They remove doubt and insert faith. They replace fear with confidence rooted not in your own ability, but in his calling. A purpose cannot be fully activated while you're still clinging to an old script. As long as you're holding onto outdated ideas of who you are, what you're supposed to be, and what your life should look like, you'll miss the elevation God is offering. His edits may feel uncomfortable, even painful, but they are designed to make for power, growth, and impact that goes far beyond what you imagined. God never edits out of frustration. He edits out of vision. He sees who you are becoming, not just who you've been. And he knows the version of you that's needed for the next level. The habits, mindsets, and structures that worked in the last season can't sustain you in the next. So he begins trimming, shifting, stretching. Not because he's angry, but because he's preparing you to handle greater influence, deeper assignments, and heavier responsibility. If you're in a season where it feels like things are falling apart, it might actually be that things are falling into divine order. When God rewrites, he often removes stability to create space for faith. He removes predictability to increase your dependency. And in doing so, he expands your capacity. God's edits are often misunderstood in real time. You may not realize until later why something had to. Why end? Why a door had to close? Why a path was blocked? But when the purpose becomes clear, you'll look back with gratitude, not regret. You'll see how every edit wasn't just about change. It was about elevation. It wasn't just about fixing your story. It was about positioning you for impact. When God rewrites your story, it's always to lift your life to a level that brings him glory and brings others transformation through your obedience. You become a vessel of purpose, not just a person with plans. Your story stops being a script you're trying to control and becomes a testimony he's trying to complete. And that's the kind of story that changes the world. While you wait, you're not meant to be idle. Waiting on God is not passive. It's active trust. It's a season where your faith is refined through your daily actions, your discipline, your devotion. Worship, work, and trust are not separate tasks. They are the posture of someone who understands that waiting is preparation, not pause. These are the tools that shape your character, keep you focused, and align you with God's timing. Worship is your weapon in the waiting. It lifts your eyes off what hasn't happened and puts them on who God is. Worship keeps your heart soft, your spirit open, and your mind focused on truth rather than fear. When you worship while you wait, you're not denying the reality of delay. You're declaring the supremacy of God over it. You're saying, I trust you even here. I trust you even now. Worship rewires your atmosphere. It breaks up the heaviness of uncertainty and fills the silence with expectation. Worship also keeps you from idolizing the outcome. When all you can think about is the thing you're waiting for, you start to believe it's the answer to your peace, your joy, your purpose. But worship recenters your focus. It reminds you that the presence of God is not the reward after the wait. It's the gift during the wait. And that kind of focus will carry you through seasons when nothing else seems to make sense. But it doesn't stop with worship. You still have to work, not hustle in your own strength. But steward what you have right now. Don't wait to move until everything is clear. Move with what you know. If God gave you vision, work the vision. If he gave you breath, use it to build. Faith without works is dead. Waiting without action is stagnation. When God finds you working while you wait, it shows him that you trust the process. Noah didn't wait to start building the ark until it started raining. He built it when there was no sign of a storm. That's faith in motion. Ruth didn't sit around hoping to be rescued. She gleaned in the fields. David didn't become king overnight. He served as a shepherd, showed up with lunch for his brothers, and fought a giant when no one else would. God promotes people who prepare. Working while you wait also protects your mind. It keeps you from spiraling into doubt, fear, and passivity. It gives you momentum. You may not be able to change your situation instantly, but you can change your posture. You can decide to show up fully today, to give God your excellence today, to plant seeds even when you can't see the harvest yet. And above all, trust must run through everything. Trust that God sees what you can't. Trust that what he promised, he will fulfill. A trust that the timing may make sense now, but it will later. Trust that your obedience matters even when it feels unnoticed. When you trust, you don't have to manipulate outcomes. You don't have to force doors open. You don't have to exhaust yourself trying to be everywhere, do everything, or impress everyone. Trust is a quiet confidence. It says, I may not know how or when, but I know who. It steadies your emotions and anchors your choices. And trust is shown not just in what you say, but in how you live, how you show up when no one's clapping, how you keep doing the right thing even when the wrong thing looks easier. Worship keeps your heart aligned. Work keeps your hands moving. Trust keeps your spirit grounded. Together, they become your rhythm in the waiting. You're not just killing time. You're building faith. You're not just holding on. You're growing strong. You're becoming the kind of person who can carry what you've been praying for. When God rewrites your story, he restores what was broken, not by giving you back the old, but by giving you something better. Restoration in the kingdom is never about returning to what was. It's about stepping into what's greater. What the enemy meant for evil, a God doesn't just neutralize. He turns it for good. He takes the broken pieces and builds something stronger, something more beautiful, something more aligned with his purpose for your life. God doesn't waste pain. He doesn't ignore what you've been through. He redeems it. He rewrites it into your story in a way that brings power out of your wounds. That means nothing is beyond his reach. Not your failures, not your losses, not your darkest seasons. He doesn't just fix what was broken. He redefines it. The very things that were meant to destroy, you become the things that elevate you. He takes your scars and turns them into signs, signs of grace, signs of healing, signs of purpose. Restoration in God's hands is not a replay. It's a resurrection. It's breathing new life into what looked dead. It's reviving your vision, rebuilding your confidence, and reigniting your faith. You thought it was over, but God says it's just beginning. You thought the damage was permanent, but God is showing you that nothing is beyond his ability to transform. When God restores, he doesn't just bring back what was lost. He often multiplies it. Job lost everything, but when God restored him, he didn't just give him what he had. He doubled it. That's the nature of divine restoration. It's not about settling. It's about elevation. And often, what you thought was a loss was actually a launch pad for something bigger, something that couldn't have come any other way. But restoration doesn't always come in the way you expect. Sometimes it comes disguised as a new opportunity, a new mindset, a new environment, or a new version of you. Sometimes what God restores is not the situation, but your strength, not the relationship, but your clarity, not the job, but your joy. He restores from the inside out so that what he gives back does just look better. It lives better. You may have been dropped, betrayed, overlooked, or forgotten, but God never lost sight of you. He saw it all, and he's been rewriting your story with full awareness of every moment you thought was wasted. He knows how to bring restoration that fits your future, not your past. He knows how to give you beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, praise for heaviness, not a copy of what you had, but a creation of what you were always meant to have. That's why you don't need to fear what you've lost. What's from God can never truly be lost. It can only be repositioned. And when he brings it back around, it will be stronger, deeper, and more rooted than before. What the enemy thought would break you has only positioned you for breakthrough. God is not finished with your story. In fact, the part you thought was the ending is often the place where he begins the most powerful work. Restoration doesn't mean you go back. It means you go forward with healing, with vision, with purpose. It means your story becomes a testimony, a reminder to others that brokenness isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter written by the only one who can truly restore. So if you're in the waiting, if life feels uncertain and doors have closed, dreams have stalled, or hope feels distant, don't give up. God is not done. The silence is not absence. The delay is not denial. The brokenness is not the end of your story. You are not being buried. You're being planted. And what God is preparing in you during this season is far greater than what you've lost or what you're waiting for. He is rewriting your story with purpose, with precision, and with power. Every chapter you thought was a failure is being transformed into a foundation. Every detour is leading you exactly where you're meant to be. He's not just editing your past. He's designing your future. You may not see the full picture yet, but you can trust the author. And when he turns the page, what's coming will make sense of every delay, every tear, every moment that didn't go as planned. Your story isn't over. It's just getting good. Keep trusting, keep worshiping, keep moving. Because when God rewrites your story, he never leaves it the same. He always makes it greater.